Hello, welcome everyone. I am very grateful to be joined today by David Hernández, Kevin Wright, Glynis Boyd-Hughes, and Adj Marshall. We are here to discuss Know That You Are Worthy, experiences from first-generation college graduates. We have 31 people who came together in this book to tell their stories about what it meant to be and what it was like to be a first-generation college student. Each of the participants of the book responded to 6 prompts that I provided as the editor. First, introduce yourself, tell us what you do. Second, describe how you got into college, the process of applying, the process of preparing for college. Describe experiences that you had in college. Talk about what you feel contributed to your success. Talk about the role your family played. And then lastly, offer any tips and advice that come to your mind that you think would be relevant for any future or current first-generation students. And this format was really open-ended. So the idea was everybody who contributed to this book was going to tell their story in their unique way. There was a little bit of a structure to it, but what we were really trying to hope and capture was the sense that all of these stories are so different and dynamic in a lot of different ways. So we're joined today by, right now, we just dropped off by one person, but we're joined by either 4 or 5 of those contributors. Dr. David Hernández is one of them. He dropped off. He's got a poor connection right now. We're really hoping he joins back. And if he does, wonderful. We'll invite him in and he can talk whenever he wants. Dr. Kevin Wright, I think we're going to ask you to step up to the plate and go first while David gets his connection back, if you don't mind. So, Dr. Wright, Dr. Kevin Wright, PhD, is currently serving as a senior equity facilitator and consultant for the Center for Equity and Inclusion, CEI. Kevin's responsible for raising consciousness, building skills, and developing strategies to socialize and operationalize equity efforts throughout organizations. Wright's commitment to racial justice, equity, and inclusion is rooted in his approach with shifting cultures and processes one system at a time to advocate for individuals with historically marginalized identities. David, welcome back. Thank you. If you don't mind, we've gotten a nice introduction to Dr. Wright right now. So we'll ask you to pause for just a moment, and it's all yours, Dr. Wright.
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Rodríguez. Really appreciate being a part of this panel. Thank you for having me be a part of this book as well. I know that it's been a very extensive journey for you in order to bring this book into fruition, but nonetheless, everything happens for a reason, and I am so glad to finally see this publication come to life. And I'm really excited to see how it comes to benefit people who read through it. So one of the things that I wanted to touch on from my chapter was the experiences of language when I was navigating college as a first-gen student, and even in continuing on to pursuing advanced degrees. So what I mean by that is that when I got to college, I attended Northern Arizona University in Flagstaff, Arizona, and one of the things that I was heavily overwhelmed by was the language that was being used on campus, because I seriously thought that they were just speaking a different language. I'm just like, we're both speaking English, but I don't know what you're saying. So what I mean by that is when I was asking certain questions, when I was trying to ask for help and trying to figure out how campus resources work or where I could go around campus to seek these resources out, people were saying like, oh, well, Kevin, you got to go to the registrar for that. And it's just like, the who, the what is that? I feel like you just made that up. Please don't mess with me right now. It's been a long day. Like, who do I go to? Do I go to like the this person's office or this person? Like, where do I go? They're like, oh yeah, you got to go to the registrar, and then after that, you'll go to the bursar, which is right downstairs. I'm just like, what? So yeah, all these words. I'm just like, you got to be making this up. And then when I was going through my orientation leader was just like, okay, and here's Old Main. I'm just like, cool, old Main, what? Like, what does that mean to me? What is that supposed to, what am I supposed to do here? And I'm like freaking out. I'm just like, you made it sound so significant. Like, what am I supposed to do here as a student? And they're just like, oh, that was just the first building on campus. I'm like, you should have started with that. right? Like you made it sound like this grandiose, like you need to know this because you will spend a lot of your time in college in this building. They just made it seem like it was the most grandiose thing ever. And I'm like, oh, okay. So for historical purposes, this was the first building on campus. Got it. I respect that. Moving on. And then we got to the Health and Learning Center or the Healthy Lifestyles complex. I'm just like, what is this? And then we walk in, they're just like, yeah, this is our Healthy Learning Center. I look around, I'm like, it's a gym. Why not just call it a gym? Like there is the weights, there is the smoothie machine. This is a gym. Like it's three letters, right? It's easier to print, right? It's probably cheaper to say, why is it called Health and Learning Center? And then on my way navigating campus, I bumped into this gentleman at the time. Who I could tell worked for the university. And at the time, I'm not gonna lie, I was definitely a bit of a hothead. And I was just like, hey, watch where you're going. Like be nice to students, bro. And this person just gave me a look and was just like, my apologies. I'll be seeing you around campus. I'm just like, okay, whatever. And then someone pulled me to the side and just like, yo, Kevin, that's the provost. Why'd you say that? I'm like, the who? You just made that up. So I'm just like, what is a provost? Like I feel like y'all just like spend so much time making up these words to mess with me because I'm just like, nobody says this in everyday life, right? Nobody says this. And then in that time when I was thinking about all these terms that were said in front of me, I was actually taking the time to think of two things. One, how am I going to learn what these terms mean and actually like figure it out? And then two, I can only imagine what my friends and peers are going through where English is not their first language. You know what I mean? We're just like, how do you say provost in Spanish, right? How do you say registrar in Tagalog, right? How do you say bursar in Mandarin? So all these things I was thinking about where I'm just like, wow, the language itself is already serving as a very, very big barrier for me. And I just got onto campus. Haven't even started classes yet. Haven't even gotten books yet. Haven't even met my roommates yet. Right. And yet my biggest hurdle right now no more than maybe like 2 hours into college life, I don't understand anything that's being said around me. And I feel guilty. I feel like an imposter. I feel like I don't belong here. I feel like maybe I've taken on more than I can actually handle. Maybe I shouldn't have left home to go to college, or maybe not go to this college, right? But nonetheless, luckily enough, I was connected to Trio Student Support Services, and they broke everything down for me for the most part. And I really appreciate everything that I was able to benefit from that program. Hashtag Trio works. It is true. It is fact. I don't care what anybody says. But they were able to let me know about the resources as well as like breaking down the language and like where this language stems from, right? And how like higher education and the history of higher education, initially, especially being at a historically white institution, it wasn't initially designed to benefit or serve people that look like me and have my salient identities. So after getting that mentorship, getting that insight, getting that education and that guidance from people in Trio, I found myself being fully acclimated into the campus culture. And then I started thinking of ways where it's just like, okay, I had these issues, I had these hurdles within 2 hours of coming onto this campus. Now, what is my responsibility to change that so somebody else coming in after me doesn't have potentially worse experiences and potentially less time? Right. So I was always very adamant about being active on campus and trying to figure out what can I do to make this campus better for first gen students, for students of color, for queer and trans students, right? Et cetera, et cetera. And I really appreciate the opportunities that I was exposed to actually take advantage of transforming the campus culture into now when I go back to my alma mater, it's a completely different campus, right? I mean, back when I attended that institution, it was known as a historically white institution. And now, fast forward to 2023, Northern Arizona University is a Hispanic serving institution, and they've officially received that designation, which I think is a huge accomplishment, right? So it's just great to know that so many people, especially first gen students like myself, were a part of contributing to that change, contributing to that transformation, and contributing to making the campus far better than what it once was, knowing that there's always a continuous need for growth and development. And I also want to talk about the fact that first gen identity doesn't just solely apply to your undergraduate students. Like, that first gen identity, follows you in so many places, in so many spaces. It follows you forever, in my personal opinion, because when I got to grad school, one of the things that I was surprised by was when I figured out what I wanted to do with my life, someone told me, like, oh, now you got to go to grad school. And I was thinking, wait, what? I thought I just went to college, you got one degree, and then you're done. Right. And then you go get a job, and then you settle down with someone or multiple people, and then you have kids or not. Right. And then you just live your life. So being told that, like, oh, okay, you got to go to graduate school if you want to have this type of career or this type of experience, in the workforce. I'm just like, wow, more school. And then I was told about the GRE. I'm just like, wow, another standardized test. This isn't a barrier at all. Right. And when I got to graduate school at Lewis and Clark College, one of the first few people that I met on campus was a campus administrator, and we were just talking, getting to know each other. I'm just like, hey, by any chance, I'm sorry, I forgot. What is your position on campus? I would love to learn more about your functional area. And they said, oh, I'm the ombuds person. I'm just like, you're kidding. Come on. I thought I left this language stuff behind in undergrad. Like, what the hell is an ombuds? So I'm just like, okay, so let's talk about this and learning more nuances of navigating graduate school life, navigating additional titles that don't make sense to me, that could have been simplified, and then relapsing back into my first gen guilt mindset, where it's just like, do I belong in grad school? Did I take on too much? Should I have gone to this college for grad school? Should I have gone to grad school? Maybe this isn't for me. Maybe I'm not good enough. Right. And just seeing how easy it was to relapse back into that mindset that I have 4 years prior to starting graduate school, and just thinking like, wow, this is heavy. Like, this is so powerful. And I hate that it has this type of power over me in my mindset. And it's just living rent free because of the fact that I know for a fact that I'm good enough for graduate school. I know of the fact that I'm worthy, right? I know that I'm meant to be here. I just need to go through these additional hurdles to do so. And it just sucks, right? Because I just wish, at least one thing in my academic career was easy, but it just never was. And it is, and it isn't for many people, right? So then, got through graduate school and then eventually pursued my doctorate of education. I do have an EDD. And that's when I first learned about IRB, and I'm just like, okay, another acronym. What does this mean? And then learn about, like, oh, we have IRB because basically way back when y'all was doing illegal stuff on black and brown bodies. Okay, so seeing the nuances of how anti-blackness, right, and indigenous erasure is perpetuated in the nuances of higher education was very fascinating to me, because I'm just like, wow, like, we have this because of this, and yet we try to paint this narrative and not acknowledge the truth behind it. It's very interesting that I didn't realize that until I became a doctoral student. Um, and then during my doctoral process, I received something called academic commendation, which I did not know what that was, and then I learned that it's called something different at other institutions. But basically, academic commendation is where you write your dissertation research proposal so well that you don't have to defend it, and you move straight into IRB and then data collection, and then your only defense is basically the defense. So I did not know that was a thing, because I was always told, like, you got to write chapters 1 through 3, got to write your proposal, got to defend it, then go to IRB, then collect data, then code it, et cetera, et cetera. So when somebody said, like, oh no, I'm recommending you for academic accommodation, Kevin, it's just like, did I do something wrong? Like, because I didn't know what that meant. It just sounded so, like, fancy, and yet, like, it sounded punitive at the same time for me. Because I'm just like, wow, even as a first gen doctoral student, as a soon to be 3-time first gen graduate, this language is tripping me out, because unfortunately I'm thinking, like, did I do something? Because I've done everything that you've told me to do. Like, why am I getting academic accommodation? I literally thought I was getting punished for something. And this was following having to transfer to another institution, where I became a displaced student, because, for context, I attended Concordia University of Portland first. And for people that don't know the history with that institution, it unfortunately closed down in 2020. So I became a displaced student. I didn't even know that that was the term for it. And then I transferred to North Central University, and then I received academic commendation. So all of this just about the language of being displaced, the language of academic accommodation, the language of, pursuing and going through the IRB process. It was so overwhelming because of the fact where I'm just like, the writing assignments are not getting to me. The connections with faculty are not an issue for me. Surprisingly, even the financial obligations are not, getting to me. What's getting to me is the language that is being spoken because there is so much inaccessible verbiage that's being used around me where it's just like I feel like half the time I'm being set up, where it's just like people are like, I feel like I'm always being tested, where it's just like if I don't understand what you're saying, then therefore I'm not worthy to be in your presence simply because I don't know why, the meaning of this $20 word that you just spout out. Right. So the language was always getting to me. And it really just, it impacted my experience so much that, out of spite of how much it was impacting me, I just kept on pushing to survive and even more so pushing to succeed. Right. So I share all that because of the fact that something that I've noticed now, postdoctorate, being a three-time first-generation college graduate, I'm always looking for ways to give back to help people understand how to navigate the nuances of language in higher education and academia because of the fact that it was a big hurdle for me. And I do not want to assume that it's not potentially a big hurdle for others, especially if English is not their first language. Right. So I'm always thinking of ways where I can summarize it or make it more clear, make it more accessible, or just break it down and offer my guidance and my experience to people to let them know like, hey, don't let this word fool you. This is what this means. They mean this. They could have said this. I get it. I get it. They could have said this, but they're going to say this because it makes them sound fancy. Okay. That's why they say it. So this is what this means. This is what that means. And then you do ABC and then you'll be good to go. I always look for ways to help out people understand just so that way language doesn't become another barrier in addition to what other obstacles they may be experiencing. And I really, sometimes I really, just to wrap up my final thought, I really encourage people to not fall into the curse of knowledge, which is, once you gather all this information, you hoard it, you gatekeep it to the point where you start looking down on the same people that you actually had a mission to serve and uplift. So therefore, as a first gen, I tell other first gens, don't harm other first gens. The moment you learn something new, please share it, right? Don't gatekeep. Don't think you're all high and mighty because you know something and they don't. Like that is the whole point of dismantling and disrupting that notion. So please do what you can to succeed, to persevere, and then also please give back. And that is my statement for today's session.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. David, you're back. Welcome. We're glad to see you. I want to introduce Dr. David Hernández next, and he has been thoughtful enough to join us while on vacation. So we're really, really happy to have you and to give your time. Dr. Hernández grew up in Southern California, first in Cudahy. Did I get that right?
Okay. Close. Cudahy.
Cudahy, and then in Whittier. He was raised with two brothers, mostly by a single mother with a large extended family nearby. He applied to one university and was accepted. He majored in business economics only to years later obtain a PhD in ethnic studies, and he is now a tenured professor at Mount Holyoke College. Dr. Hernández.
Thank you. Thank you, Adam. And it's a pleasure to be on this panel with everyone that contributes to this volume. And so a couple of things I want to say is first, I was very excited to talk to Adam about this volume. It was such a great idea, and I'm happy to have contributed something. And I think one of the things we learn from these, whether it's students reading this or administrators or other professors, is that, it's been done before. And so a lot of the troubles that I had, some of the things that Kevin mentioned, other people have cleared the pathway for us. And so you should, as isolating as it can feel to be a first generation college student, the only one in the room, exactly what Kevin said, like not understanding the language, is that know that there are other folks on campus, whether they're staff or faculty or your peers, that are just like you and have experienced this. And so that's the great thing about this volume. It says that we're all there and we all experience this. I did want to say a couple things following up on Kevin about language. And yeah, I experienced the same thing at every level. All these words, all these acronyms, fancy words. I didn't know what they were. And in many ways, I didn't know what the majors were. I didn't know what sociology was. I didn't know what anthropology was. That's why I majored in business economics, because I knew what those words were. I knew what history was, a couple others. And so I checked the box, majored in business economics, and graduated with that degree. Years later, I made a complete kind of 180-degree switch to something very different, which is in many ways anti-business economics, which is ethnic studies, the study of race in America. And that was just such a big move. But undergraduate major, people would ask, well, why'd you major in that? I was like, I'm first gen, I didn't know any better. But also I realized later, none of my friends were in that major. I didn't talk to anyone in that major. All my friends were in other things. And it was just one of those things. But I did learn something. I learned problem solving, other skills. But the thing about the language issue that Kevin mentioned was that that one, you can learn language. And so that's the good news. I remember when I was in graduate school, I wrote down, there was all these new terms. And again, I was switching from business economics to American studies, completely different degree, all this new language. And so I just wrote down the terms and walked into every professor's door and just said, can you tell me your working definition of this term and that term and that term? And I was so naive, but I think they took me honestly, and I learned the terms. But the other half of that is you do not want to, when you bring in terminology to a discussion, especially with other people around, students, define your terms, because it's unfair to bring in knowledge from outside that pushes somebody to the side. So you always want to be able to define those terms, so you're not marginalizing someone. So that Kevin doesn't feel marginalized in a conversation, So if you define those terms, you invite people in, and so that's an important skill that we learn. What do I want to say? So a few things I like to say about the first gen experience. I mean, there's so many, but one of them that I like to make clear is that this is not just my status, it's my family status. Kevin mentioned Northern Arizona University. My nephew went to Northern Arizona University, and he was the first 18-year-old kid in my family to go to college after high school since me. And so that was like a 30-year break. And I'm talking about mega cousins, nephews, nieces. No one went straight out of high school. So he was the first one after me. So my path did not clear it for anyone. And so I had some cousins that went as adults. They returned to college and they graduated. It was fantastic. But the thing is there was something about my family and education. There was a disconnect, lack of trust, some as I write in the chapter, some just almost like cynicism towards it, trust towards education. And so that was a problem. But the main thing is that when I say first gen as a family status, is we're all first gen because our parents didn't go to college. So the real question is, why didn't they go? And maybe they were working class, maybe they were focused on this or that, maybe they weren't invited, just like we were barely invited in. And so it's much more than that. It's much more than just our individual experiences. So I like to stress that we start asking why someone's parents didn't go, you started getting very interesting answers, and that are connected to why we're the first. And so I like to stress that. The other thing that's very important for me to understand about being a first gen in college and all the other levels, as Kevin said, every other level of graduate school, doctorate, professional job, it keeps coming back. The main thing is that whereas for some people, going to college connects people to their family. Oh, I'm going to the same place as my parents, or oh, my sibling went and we're both college graduates, or now we all went to the same institution. It's sort of the opposite for us. We sort of make a break from our families when we do this, and that can cause some tension. That as the first, we experience things that they might have never experienced. We learn things that they might not have access to learning, and so oftentimes it creates this division as well. And that can be remedied. I'm not saying it's permanent, but it's just something to work with. And so when we come back home, So we're weird in college, but we're also weird at home because we went to college. And so it's like, it's this constant tension. And so I think administrators especially should understand that when a student is first gen, that they're making a big break from their family, and that's going to be difficult. Sometimes it's difficult for family to visit for that reason, because they don't feel comfortable there either, just like we barely feel comfortable at the outset. And so really that's important. The last thing that I'd like to mention is that I think being first gen is kind of a series of peaks and valleys. You know, you start low, there's a huge learning curve, you don't know the language, you don't know the people, everyone seems like they know each other already for some reason. And then you catch up. You learn to study, you do well in school, and you succeed, hopefully. But then if you go into graduate school, you start, and then you got to learn new language again, and you have to figure out how to succeed. And there's, how do you talk to professors, and what's the professionalization experiences that have to be handled. And so it's constantly learning and learning again. And then you forget about it. You think, okay, I excelled at graduate school. Now I have a job, I'm a professor, that everything should be fine. But then you learn once again that you have to, that there's a new learning curve. And so that's one thing to keep in mind, and not to be stressed about it, just to know it's coming. And if you're aware it's on the way around the corner, then you'll be ready. You know, you'll do what you've done before. Because I like to, when I meet first gen students, they're usually pretty scrappy young people. You know, they know how to succeed, they know how to work on their own, and that's a real skill. You know, I don't think you should spend your life being scrappy. You can also ask for help, and you can get, you should see the deans and the administrators that can help you succeed. But that scrappiness is still a skill. But the bottom line is that the pedigree is not there, and because we're first gen, we're never really going to have the pedigree. And so, you know, you sort of have to accept that and then just work with what you have. I like to tell the story that my first job was, I was an assistant professor at UCLA, and so a great university, a good job. And when I was at some social event, and I mentioned part of it in the essay. We were talking about in LA, and we talking about dive bars, actually. So we're talking about going to dive bars, and I said, "Oh yeah, I grew up in a bar." I said that very casually, and then people were just shocked. And I was like, "Well, what I mean is that my dad was an alcoholic." So I kept digging a bigger hole, and we went there all the time, and I learned how to shoot pool and play the jukebox. And basically, it was a conversation ender. Everyone went mute. No one talked to me, and suddenly they saw me different. You know, where I was once a peer just like them, and a college professor just like them. And so it was one of those things where my pedigree wasn't there. And I sort of shared a little, I overshared a little, and it was honest. It was, to me, it was funny. And, but so that's the kind of thing that I get reminded once in a while about that pedigree. And I don't think that necessarily needs to be a negative thing. It's just honesty. It's just who I am. And I don't let it get behind. I don't let it sort of slow me down. But I should say that, yeah, I think being first gen is a terrific experience. I see those students when I see them, because I teach, I see them in the classroom, and I reach out to them because I can tell that they're kind of doing it on their own. I titled my chapter "In My Own Way" because I think that's what's important, is that there's no set pathway to success. Everyone in this volume carved out their own pathway, and you need to remind young people and students that they can do the same thing. And so that's what I think is important. I'm very happy to be part of this volume, and I'm honored to be part of this panel. So thank you, Adam. I'm done.
Well, and thank you as well. It really is. It's exciting for me today. This is actually the first time I'm really getting to meet most everybody. But it's been such an honor to get to know everybody. And I feel so indebted to everybody for so much they gave in contributing to this. So thank you. I really appreciate it. So I want to introduce Glynis Boyd-Hughes next. Ms. Boyd-Hughes is currently the Public Guardian Program Director at Senior Connections in Richmond, Virginia. Utilizing her social justice grounded education and lived experiences to now serve elders and persons with disabilities to ensure they are afforded resources and support needed to live their best quality of life. She recently applied to Virginia Commonwealth University School of Gerontology and is awaiting a decision on admission to the program that will prepare her to become a gerontologist. With a long-term goal of doctoral studies centered in research on the intersectionality of aging, ability, and personal awareness. She's also proud to share that her husband, Gary, is graduating next year with his undergraduate degree as a first-generation college student, as well as one grandchild in college and another preparing to attend in 2024. Both grandchildren are first-generation. Glynis also has a niece who shares the status of first-generation college student. She marvels in this, as when she started college, she started alone. Now there is a first-gen movement within her family. Glynis dedicates sharing her first-generation college student journey to her late daughter, Gabrielle, who died unexpectedly in 2022. Gabrielle was the catalyst for her mother's determination to pursue higher education as a means toward a better standard of life for them. Thank you very much. With that, it's yours.
You read that so beautifully. I mean, just so beautifully. Thank you. Thank you for having me here and being with all of you. My colleagues that just spoke, you said so many things that I can build on. I think the first thing, two things I want to say. One, the scrappiness does not stop with young folks. I graduated with my undergraduate at 52 and my master's and a post-bac at 53. So it's safe to say that pursuing a doc, I'll be in my early 60s and still scrappy and still asking for help. As far as where we come from, I went to a training recently and they wanted people to describe themselves. I've never seen so many people have so much difficulty describing themselves. Who am I? Who am I? I have one line. I'm a round-the-way girl with a few college degrees. Where I come from, how I grew up, my community, it all influenced who I am. And my chapter is under social experiences in the book, which I think really speaks to the heart of me. When I started college, I was a teen mom. I'd been a high school dropout, teen mom. I went into the auditorium of a community college. I didn't know what I was doing. I just knew that education somehow was going to make life better for myself and my daughter. I managed to get to VCU and somehow got a job as a social worker. And for almost 20 years, I worked as a social worker and I was good at it. But sometimes there are things that still stay with you and you still need to get them done. And I went through, I guess, my midlife crisis in my 40s. And at 49, I'm standing on the campus of VCU wondering, what am I doing and how am I going to do this? Because everything was different. We talk about the first gen identity, which, fun fact, I never even knew such a thing existed until I went to VCU. And when we talk about language, which is a whole nother conversation, I think in one of my first classes, they were talking about MLA. And I remember sitting there thinking, why are they talking about that rapper girl? Because it was some rapper girl out whose name was 3 letters. And I used that to explain how that language can make you feel that you can't get in. Fortunately, as my colleagues have alluded to, having folks who are invested in students, particularly first-gen students, that they can see there's something in you, or as I say, folks who believe in you until you learn how to believe in yourself. When I went back to VCU, I got involved in everything. And one of the first things I did was start an organization for post-traditional students, because there was nothing on campus for folks who had families or were in their 50s or whatever the case may be. When I started out, there was nothing at VCU for us. Now VCU has an office and a director for non-traditional and adult learner students. They include them in everything. It's on the website. They have events. Retro Rams that I started now has 100 members. So I know all about that scrappiness, making something happen. You don't have to necessarily stay, you just make it happen and you keep it moving. When I look at my chapter, and it's funny, I don't know if you all have done this, but you read things, like the first time I got a real resume done, it was like, oh my God, who is this person? Did I do these things? Because you don't see yourself that way. It's like you're just pieces all around. And even the lived experiences, which I'm really happy to see are becoming more important in organizations when they're looking at equity and inclusion, understanding that what people bring to the table from their lives, not just their academics, not just their work, it matters. A student asking me, Glynis, what is social capital? I said, girl, that's just who you know and who knows you. That's it. Making it something that's accessible, because accessibility has to go all the way around. When I graduated with my master's, I was very sure I was going to be a dean in about 2 months. I was pretty certain about that. Obviously, that did not happen. I wrote grants. I worked at a community college. I could not get a job. But the person who pretty much had been my inspiration for education became ill and passed. And that changed everything. And there is nothing more clarifying than having a person who has been the center of your existence now gone. And for me, the focus was, I need to find a job. The work that I do now, what I'm slowly coming to see is that this is the work I was coming to. The things I've done along the way, my being a first-gen student, that resiliency, that no, I'm not going to take no for an, I don't take no for an answer. I'm hard to say no to. You say no to me, you got to have a good reason, because you can't get things done. And that's important to know as a first-gen student, as we all know, because at that first time you hear something you don't understand, if your rationale is, well, I don't get this, I'm going to go, well, honey, you are not going to make it through life, because that is going to happen. And that is something I teach to my grandkids. These things are going to come. You cannot avoid it. It's like living in Florida. Florida gets hurricanes. They know that. They still move there, but they prepare. They know to listen out. They know to have the shelters and all the things that you do. And if you can do that, it doesn't mean that the storm is going to pass you by. It means that you can continue to stand. And when it's all said and done, that's what you want to do. Sometimes the things that Kevin was talking about belonging, in my role now, it's my first real grown-up leadership role. Well, I'm working with a coach, and one of the things she mentioned was my being a first-generation college student. And it's no irony that, yeah, you're first generation, everything you do. I can become president of IBM, and I'm still going to have days where it's like, I cannot believe I'm in here and I'm doing this, because I have those moments. I'm responsible for a budget, for people, for things. And sometimes I say to myself, am I supposed to be doing this? Because this is like real grown-up stuff. And then I have to say, of course you are. You are more than capable. You are more than competent, more than enough. That is something that I go back to my early days in college when, you know, I'm living pillar to post. Some semesters I'm excelling, some I'm failing. Sometimes I'm in school because I need to get some extra financial aid because we're broke. We need the money. That's real. And so seeing how higher education has evolved to be more holistic, to understand that being a student means, in the pursuit of this higher education dream, if you will, students can be sacrificing everything and even presenting it in a way where maybe going that first, yes, I'm going to apply to Yale, I'm getting in, that's wonderful. Did you get a full ride? Okay, no, we might want to think about something else, because there are other aspects to this life. Money management. I can't speak for anyone on this panel. I learned more about that later in life. And as Adam alluded to in my intro, it does amaze me that people around me are like, Glynis, I'm inspired. My husband, he was like, well, I'm thinking about going back to school. He was like, what do you think? I said, well, you can go back or not. I said, either way, you're just gonna get older. So what do you want to do with it? Do you want to be older with your degree, or do you want to be older wishing you had done it? And now he's getting a degree for free because he works at VCU, and he's finding things he's really interested in. The kids, they weren't thinking about it, but now they're on a path. Denise, and I realized, I'm not going to get teary, Adam. I think I can keep it together. What I realized is all those things that I went through in my past, being alone, being in a class and not having time to really engage because I got to go to work or whatever. All those things lead to my grandchild calling me and saying, Grandma, I'm so glad you went to college. That means the world to me, because there are things that he'll have his challenges. They all will. But there are things that I can say, you don't have to go through this. And it's not to avoid, because I don't think avoiding conflict and challenge is healthy. I don't. I think learning to manage it is what needs to be done. And first gen students, I think I wrote something in my chapter to the effect of, there's a part of me, just a little part, I kind of feel for people who don't have that. I don't think a lot of things like pedigrees or hierarchies or, I don't think. On my wall, which is quite blank right now, as you can see, because my office is new, I'm putting my stuff up. But at the very top of my education ladder will be my GED. Because without my GED, I would not have been able to do the other things. And talking to people to help them understand that education is like a saying, with Black women, we talk about good hair. That's another story. Any education is good education. There's no such thing as this is better, this is worse. I would dare say a GED or a high school diploma holds as much weight as a PhD, but in a different way, because it is the foundation on which you build the rest. And so when we start dismantling these ideas of, oh, you're this and you're that, how about this? You're someone who stayed the course and you would not stop. A long time ago, someone told me that education is not a race, it's a marathon. And the main thing is that you stay in it and that you get to whatever your goal is. So at this point, as I look at something I never thought I'd be interested in after my daughter passed, I was in a pre-doc program, before she died at the University of Colorado. I had all these other grandiose ideas. And after, I'm thinking, well, I'm not doing it. It's not necessary. What I understand now is that it's very necessary. And what I'm doing now continues to build on the investment that she made in me, because parents are not the only ones that invest in their children. Our children invest in us, and they count on us to do right and do good with whatever it is. And so to think about her children graduating, to think about they have the possibility to have the lives they want, not just lives inherited. And for many of us as first-gen students, we're taking on stuff. It's like, I didn't ask for this, but I got to carry it. And we do, and we're successful. But how radical it is to be able to use your own life and experiences to make somebody else's way just a little bit clearer. So I appreciate the time to share about my journey and all of that. And I thank you all for what you brought to the table as well.
Thank you. I'll mention really quickly, I am a psychologist, so I like tears. That is my domain. I'm always encouraging of tears, welcoming of tears, celebrating of tears. I think the more tears we have, the better, either to express the sadness, the joy, the happiness, whatever it is. So never hold back is sort of my motto, but thank you. Finally, today we have Adj Marshall. Adj is an equity, diversity, and inclusion trainer, writer, and advocate for socioeconomic equity with a focus on cross-class communication. Her work has been published in the collections Teaching Economic Inequality and Capitalism in Contemporary America and At the Intersection, Understanding and Supporting First-Generation Students. I haven't read the first of those two yet, but the second one is phenomenal. So I strongly encourage it for everyone. And I also borrowed heavily from your chapter, Adj, in some of the stuff that I put in this book. In 2012, Adj founded the First Gen Summit, the oldest cross-campus gathering of first-generation low-income college students, which she continues to lead today. Her experience growing up as a member of a chronically poor and often homeless single-parent family is what led her to this work. Adj earned her BA while supporting her brother's pursuits of associate's degrees. She holds her first MA in Public Humanities and Cultural Heritage from Brown University, and her second in Intercultural Leadership and Management from the School for International Training. Thank you. Ms. Marshall, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for sharing. I just want to say the same as Glynis, that you have a very great presence in the delivery of bios that doesn't feel, a little too overwhelming. I just want to say to everyone on this panel, it's been really beautiful to hear everyone's stories and to feel like I am part of a community, that these things that people are sharing here are elements that I have also experienced or challenged myself with, or been able to be part of for a long element of time. The thing that as Adam noted, the thing that I really, really focus on in my work is around social class and the intersection of our first gen identity for those of us who have a low income background, and just how important it is and how it actually really changes the college experience for a student. So for someone like myself, I entered college and I had been part of a couple of college access programs, and those programs were really great, except they provided me with lots of information on college, but no information on how to take that information that they had given me and turn it into an application, turn it into something that met the requirements of what an institution was going to be looking for. So I had all of this base knowledge. It's like someone handing you a book and saying, here, teach yourself the course. And that's sort of how I felt like these college access programs were working. And, it was a step up to have someone say, here's the book, because some people never get the book, but I got the access to the book, but I still wasn't told, how do you read a book? How do you skim? How do you take notes? All of those pieces I didn't feel like were part of my process in applying to college. And I also had the added challenge of the fact that I was not living with my family. I have two brothers. We're Irish triplets. So that means that we are all born within the same year. There's 3 of us. And it is a real exciting thing to think about, having that many people to see your family doing school with you along the way. And I remember in high school, we had free lunch and free breakfast. And if you got to free breakfast, you had to come to school early to go into the cafeteria to get that special token that allowed you the free breakfast from the state. And that was the place where I saw my brothers, because we didn't live together as a homeless family. So every morning, that free breakfast from the public school was the place where I got to have family time with my siblings. And that was just a powerful thing for me to see that, okay, the school is providing me an opportunity to engage with my family, and they don't even know how important this is. And I think that same thing happened when I entered college. For me, I remember entering college. I entered college as a computer science major, which, as a female computer science major a decade ago, I was one of 2 in the entire program. And one of the other young women who was in the program, she was Cape Verdean, and she knew that the school was not a really good fit for her. But she had the capacity to find a new environment for her that would fit her much better. And for me, the college institution was more than just a place for education. For me, college was the most stable place I had ever lived. I had a roof over my head. I had a phone for the first time in my entire life. I had a washing machine down the hall that I could access at any time. These things to me felt like just like this is a wonderful place because I have these things, they're at my fingertips and it makes my life easy. But it also means that when I realized that this school really wasn't a good fit for me, that I didn't really, it was more than that this school isn't a good fit for me. It's like, this school is my housing, it is my food, it is all of my basic needs. And if I go somewhere else, will those basic needs still be in place for me? And as most of us know, transfer students don't actually get as much financial aid as other students. And so I ended up being in a place for myself where I had to be thinking about my educational experience as more than just education. It really was about my basic survival to be an individual and to continue that work, because my family couldn't support me in that endeavor at the moment because they were dealing with their own challenges of, meeting their own basic needs. And so I just want to say to all those students out there who are thinking about how the institution is both, a place that offers education, it also is often a place that offers refuge and stability for some individuals in a way that's so important. And I don't know that our institutions see that so often, that they recognize how important those things are, and also how powerful it is when people don't see that space. An example of this I write about in my book chapter. I'm talking about the experience of realizing that school is going to close at the end of the summer and I have nowhere to go to live. And so I have to find someone on campus who I have to ask a favor for. And I think as someone who comes from poverty, it's really hard. You've spent a lot of your life asking people for favors, asking for a couch, asking for a place to be, and to have to do that again. And oftentimes, like we talked about, in addition to the language, there's also, we like to, anyone who now is in academia as a professional recognizes that there's all this siloing that happens between different departments and different elements. So, there's often student support services, which is separate from like the housing, which is separate from the education. And all of those things are affected by our lives, but we often are asked, oh, you need to tell this person your story. Oh, that wasn't the right person. Now, like Kevin was saying, you got to go downstairs and talk to this other person as well. And you got to tell them your story. And so it's really about this place of like putting your trauma on display. And that can be a really hard place to be, is when you're trying to talk about your own experience and share what is important, but also convey it in a way that you is going to sort of tug at someone's heartstrings and they'll offer you the thing that you need, right? And I think that for me, when I did that, I was lucky in some senses because I had applied to become an RA, because that would be free housing for me, or at least partially funded housing for me. And I had gotten the position, but my position didn't start until the fall. So that first summer, my freshman summer, I was able to convince them to, give me a giant Nokia phone where I'd be on call for a couple weeks in the summer, and they would sort of start my job a little early, as they called it. And that was my free housing that first summer. And that was just so important to me, but I also had to do a lot of work to get to that point. I had to ask 3 different offices where to go. I had to find the space and the willpower within myself to say, it is okay, your story is important, and you can share it and not have it be the end of your world, right? Like, it is embedded in a lot of difficult things, but sharing it is going to get you the resources that you need. The unfortunate part is sometimes we're asked to share our stories in ways that we don't and shouldn't have to. And I just want to say to you all to remind yourselves that you own your own personal story, and you can use that in whatever way that you feel fit in terms of getting what you want. And another piece of the story that I write about in the chapter is how I used my story, both in positive and negative ways. Sometimes I was going to a primarily white institution, but I am white, so I was able to pass in a lot of ways within the institution as a student who didn't need support. People, the institution would be like, oh, you look like everyone else, you're a middle class, $100,000 income family, great, you'll be fine here. And what happened for me in terms of that is that I would be in classrooms and hear people talk and just have such kind of entitlement to the things that they had been seeking in their lives. I wanted to do this thing, and so I just went and did it, and it was no big deal. I didn't have to take on any extra steps to get to that point. And sometimes I just wanted to, sit there and scream at the other people and be like, no, this is what other people are dealing with, and this is how it happens, and this is like what it looks like for someone who has to do the extra work. And sometimes I did. I used my story as what I refer to in the book chapter as a weapon, as a tool for me to make other people feel uncomfortable. And that is something that I recognize now is probably not the best mode of using my story, but it was a way that I did use my story. And so I also recognize that there's a space where sometimes I decided to not tell my personal story about being a first gen, about being low income, coming from poverty, because I didn't want to deal with the things that David mentioned, that idea of silence. When you share something that's so outside of someone else's conception of the world that they just don't know how to respond. And it's not necessarily a negative thing, but they don't have, talking about that cross-class communication element, is there isn't a language for them to engage with your story because our class lives are so different. And so I think about often how we use our stories, both we can use them in negative ways, we can hold them back and try and keep ourselves safe by not sharing them, and also finding that space in between where we're able to share who we are authentically, not feel like we're using that as something to be displayed, but also own that story too. Because sometimes we're asked to share our story because others want to hear it, and we don't necessarily own it when we let others share that story for us, particularly institutions in these, as first gen has become more and more popular, I think that lots of students are asked to share about their first gen identity. And sometimes that is, some students don't necessarily want to share about that, right? They have other identities that are more important to them, or they believe that that's not the most valuable thing about themselves, whereas the school sees that as the thing that they have attached themselves to. So I very much am sort of saying here that I would love for you all to think about, what is your story? And all of us here have told stories from our lives. How do you use that story as an inspiration, as a sort of charging station to move you forward when you're feeling like your batteries have been depleted? How do you use and engage with your own story to keep you moving forward to reach those goals that you're setting out for yourself? So I don't know that that is, I think that it's a really powerful thing to think about our story and how we use it. And I just want to say thank you for everyone here who shared their story, because I know your stories have all been an inspiration to me. I have one last piece that I wanted to share about in terms of thinking how institutions serve you as students. So I talked a little bit about that space of sharing my story in order to get access to housing, to get access to food. And sometimes the things that institutions provide us with are what is easiest for them and not necessarily what's most important and most valuable to us. So for me, an example of this was I got to college and was placed in a remedial English class because I failed not one, not two, but 3 different free tests that could potentially have gotten me out of this remedial English class. And one of the things my school was super proud about was that none of our classes were taught by individuals who were graduate students or graduate assistants. All of our courses were taught by people who had a title as a professor of some sort. And the institution provided this group of students who was deemed as being not ready with a graduate student. And I'm no offense to graduate students, I think they're great teachers, but that graduate student had no accountability to us as students. That graduate student was only there for the semester. They weren't going to be, there wasn't someone I could call on next semester and to be like, you taught me this thing, but I don't remember exactly how to work on it. And so for me, when we're thinking about what are the things that we offer institutions and to our students, to be really, really clear, and this is advice to the administrators out there, to be focusing on what the students need and how do we provide them with the best possible services and the best people, rather than sort of thinking about, you know, what is best for us as an institution. So yeah, I don't know. I feel like that was a lot to share, but I wanted to thank you all for that time.
Thank you. We have a few more minutes left. I have so many thoughts in hearing all of this. So I find that I don't have specific questions so much as these thoughts that emerge and coalesce around the things that everybody have shared. Because one of the things that I noticed pretty quickly was that the things that people were sharing touched so consistently upon these themes that we see so repeatedly in the experiences of first generation students. And there's a couple that come to mind. I noticed that so many people, so many of you are doing work in some regard that's associated with DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And this idea of inclusion has come up so much with the themes that everybody has been talking about today. I mean, it started right away, Kevin, when you started talking about language, because that's about inclusivity and exclusivity, right? It's about this sort of way in which there's a signal that we receive, whether we're having that be told to us explicitly or whether we're registering it on a different level, that this is not a space that you necessarily belong in, or at least that we haven't constructed it for you, that we belong, but we may not feel like we belong because the system is set up, the structure of the institution is set up with all of this jargon and language and terminology that we're not familiar with. And it begins to feel exclusive. It begins to feel like, oh, maybe I don't belong here, maybe I shouldn't be here. And I noticed how strikingly that was repeated by everybody in a different form, that on some level, the messages that were received were, this is an environment that's been set up that contains all of these different ideas and concepts that you're not necessarily privy to. It makes me think about, I don't know if anybody else had it, but for me, as a first generation student, growing up, college always had this mystique and idea of being directly associated with intelligence. If you're smart, you go to college and you're successful and you're fine. And one of the things that absolutely blows me away is we've been talking about the college experience for over an hour. And outside of one brief thing that you mentioned at the end, Age, very little or nothing about it was about the academics. It was all about the social milieu. It was all about being in that environment and understanding how to navigate the environment. Because everybody here had the aptitude and the intelligence. Everybody had the ability to be successful in college. Now, we may not have been as well prepared as some other people, but we all had the aptitude or ability. It was overcoming all of those different social situations, whether it's the exclusive language and jargon, the financial hardships, or something. It wasn't about, am I smart enough to do this? Will I be academically successful in this? Although that's an issue. For everyone, it was about, now I'm here and I don't understand how this works. I don't understand how to be in this environment and use the skills and the attributes and the scrappiness that I have to be successful. And so I just want to sort of present that thought if anybody has other further reflections on it. It's not so much a question as it is this observation of some theme that seems to run through these stories.
I have just a story I think I want to share that I think really speaks to what you just said. When I graduated with my master's and I received it in the mail, it was in Latin. And I knew it was Latin, even though I couldn't read it. And I remember how angry I became. And I became angry because my graduate program was based in social justice. I learned about the origins of higher ed, which deeply depressed me because I never thought slaves were on campuses. So it was a real eye opener. But I remember writing to the college and basically saying how offensive it was to receive a degree written in a language that I didn't know anything about. And I just imagined it being on the wall somewhere in an office and a student saying, "Oh, what does this say?" And I'm like, "Oh, I have no idea." I talked about being a Black woman with disabilities, older, and they sent me one in English. And since then, they have disbanded that. And so when I talked about that to folks, they talk about, well, why was it so upsetting? The best way I can explain it is that when you talk about the academics part, navigating, I always say I'm not an exception in that regard. There are so many intelligent, brilliant, smart, what's the saying? You put a fish on a bike, it's like, yeah, he doesn't know what he's doing. But you put him in water, he's swimming. It's like so many people have all of that, but because of the things that we talked about, why we kept doing whatever, I mean, I don't have a secret formula. What I do know is that I personally feel I have responsibility because I do have certain things now. I know words, I know things. It's my job to do things like say, hey, if you're going to put it in a language, put it in the language of the people of the land on which the college is built. They didn't do that, but it's not in Latin anymore. And I think I think college is a microcosm of life. Yeah. Is that how we manage there kind of sets us up for what we're doing after. And so we kept pushing there. You're going to push somewhere else, and maybe us doing that are helping other students at wherever that level do the same.
I wanted to build a little bit on that. Now that I'm a working professional, I am a manager and I manage younger people. And the thing that I'm always saying to the young people in my group of advisees is, I can teach you the skills of work, but the thing you didn't get taught at college was the politics of work, the socialization part of work. What is it like to be in the working culture? And I feel like, Adam, you were getting at that when you were speaking to this environment, is that we all were prepared. We had the skills, we could get through college. That wasn't the problem. It was really the interactions with other people and how we get through that was most important. And I feel like I'm repeating that on a daily basis when I'm talking to my young professionals about how they get through their working life as well. And so it was interesting, I think, for me to just see the parallels there of that so much of our life is about the social interactions with others, and that the work, you know, whether that's our studies, whether that's like what we do on a day-to-day, those are things we can learn and that we can build, and it doesn't matter what background we're coming from.
I'd like to add to that. I'm glad you noticed that, Adam, about the social aspects, because obviously beyond the meat and potatoes of going to school, reading, writing, arguing, you know, articulating yourself, you know, for first gen, there's these enormous social hurdles, you know, as well. Making friends, all those things. And so it is a big part of the story. But there's still that part. And I mean, I'm a teacher, so I'm always focusing on that. The other day, I had a student come in, and first gen student had like internships and was a national representative of this, a national representative of that, goes to conferences as an undergraduate, amazing, but was struggling with the basic classes. And it's like, there's still the meat and potatoes and you got to be good at this, all those other things won't matter if you're not getting good grades in these classes. And so, there's still the skill building and there's long-term, I always tell my students, take the long view. You're not going to be a great writer overnight. You have 4 years, hopefully. And, or if you're a transfer student, I'll be shorter, but you have time to improve. And as long as you're turning the screws and making it tighter every time, you'll get better. And but there are those social aspects too. And so the one thing I tell students, especially first gen, is don't compare yourself to everyone around you, because you're the unicorn here. They're like, their parents went to college and they have this and they're upper middle class and someone else is paying for it. They have luggage. You don't even have luggage, so, just see it. So, you have to set your own standards for sure. And, that's what matters most, because that's just going to bring you down. You're always going to find someone better. So it's a waste of time, but, so you need to sort of make your own sort of metrics of success. And there's some already laid out their grades and what your professors expect, et cetera. And so it's as we've all said, it's very doable, but you gotta bust your butt a bit and handle the social stuff too, because it is part of the story. That's all.
And it makes me think about how, right, there are going to be some academic challenges. And so much of those academic challenges have this connection to what is the academic pipeline that somebody has had from, really birth up until the point that they're in college, right? So to disabuse this notion that it's about intelligence or not, it's about preparation, whether that be social, academic, or psychological, whatever it is. It's about, have you had the circumstances, whether they be within your family, within your schools, within your environment, to help prepare you for this next environment and this next step. So to get away from that notion that it's just strictly this black and white intelligence thing, but as you point out, David, that there is this connection between, okay, now I get into this new environment and I have different academic standards, and maybe I can acclimate to that, maybe I can ramp up to it. But you're also navigating these social differences as well. And that just compounds it. And it makes it a really, really challenging thing. And as you point out, some other people don't have to worry about some of those other aspects. It gives them more space to develop that. The scrappiness was the other one. That's the other one that stands out. And it's the one that I love, because it's so present in all 31 stories that people shared in this book, right? That there is some drive, some motivation that is there, but also in addition to it just being this sense of like an internal drive that can be informed by so many different things. For some people, it's, I have to make it to be financially secure, to not disappoint my family, to not disappoint myself. There might be pressures from a lot of different perspectives, but that there's also that, who was it? It was Glynis, you talked about social capital, right? That the experiences that so many first generation and so many first generation low income students come in with are so varied and multiplicitous, and they often inform and shape a type of scrappiness and strength and resolve that a lot of students who come from a more privileged background haven't experienced or don't have. And it can really be a very powerful advantage, a tremendously powerful advantage. I worked all throughout school. I worked all throughout grad school, and most of my peers didn't. And one of the things I really noticed was how it just prepared me to be in the world as a working, responsible individual. And so many other people just didn't have that. And that's a really matter of fact, kind of simplistic thing, the difference of having had jobs versus not. But there are cultural perspectives, individual perspectives, world perspectives that first generation students come in with that bring this broader understanding of and experience of college. So there's the scrappiness, but that scrappiness, I think, is informed by so many different things, including the fact that first generation students so often are coming in with a perspective and a set of experiences which are different and so valuable. And I hate when they get suffocated and drowned out at college, which happens so often. And I love when they get nourished, enhanced, and celebrated, and they get to blossom into something which we can use in our own development. Well, any other thoughts or ideas from anyone before we close today?
I was going to say one thing. When Adj was talking about the story as a weapon and stuff, and it just made me think of, and this is something I wrote about when, and this is related to scrappiness, is that I sort of just, I felt sort of pushed to the side, invisible, all these things in college. And so I made it my goal in this major that was essentially foreign to me, and I was foreign to it, to sort of just do better than everyone around me. And it was, I succeeded that way. If there was someone I didn't like, I just made sure I did better than them. And but it was that kind of adversarial, and I think I got myself in the foot that way. And if I could do it again, I would just focus on the intellectual aspects, the fun stuff, the going to lectures, just the being in college. I didn't have that opportunity because I was too busy fighting with those around me or trying to best the people that I thought were out to get me or whatever. And again, it worked in terms of achieving grades and graduation, those things. But it was a kind of adversarialness that I think there's a better way. That now that I know there's a better way, that you don't have to do battle with everyone around you. You're gonna have to do some battles, but you want to choose those very carefully. And so that's what I heard when I heard Adj talking about that story as the weapon. That it became too negative. And then when I got to graduate school, I got to do it a different way, and so it was much better since then. But as an undergraduate, it was just beat the guy who I thought was a snob. So, and I could have done better. I could have even beat 2 snobs above him, but I wasn't. I was only shooting for him, and so that's something I don't regret. It was just my path, but I've changed since then. And students, you don't have to do it that way.
Yeah, and I would add, I appreciate the fact that the theme of scrappiness was intertwined across all the chapters in the book, because I think that's like, I agree with what's been said in terms of like, hey, we don't need to necessarily weaponize it or always focus on the negative, even though that's sometimes hard to do at certain times and others. And at the same time, I think that also contributes to the resilience factor of many first gen students and many first gen individuals, because of the fact that there have been plenty of situations that I've either have experienced, lived, or have witnessed where some of the most resourceful people just happen to be other first gen folks, or some of the most, dependable people that I've been around have happened to be first gen folks. You know what I mean? Like when I go around and I see people doing like workshops about DEI work, time management, financial literacy, many of them are like the heavy hitters of their industry, and they just all happen to be first gen folks. Not saying that non-first gen folks aren't doing this work. It's just that much of that upbringing, right? Many of us attended another college before we went to our, the first formal colleges, if you will. Me and my friends, we used to say that, before we went to Northern Arizona University, we went to HKU, Hard Knock University, otherwise known as the School of Life, right? So it's one of those things where we picked up a few lessons before we even stepped foot onto this campus. So when people would ask us, like, how can you make $5 stretch in a week, Kevin? And it's just like, life taught me how to do that. It wasn't cute, it wasn't sexy, it wasn't fun, but at the same time, I know how to do it, right? And how do you translate that into other situations where you're basically just trying to survive? We're trying to get to the next level. You're trying to be better. You're trying to improve. So it's one of those things where like I appreciate that scrappiness in the sense of like, many first gen folks that I have in my network, they do a good job at not taking mess from people. They are very good at navigating politics, or as my colleagues and I like to say, politricks. And then also being mindful of like how to navigate certain situations where it's just like, yeah, like Adj said, like Glynis said, like there's a time and place for everything, right? So being mindful of how to literally navigate as social chameleons, right? I think that's something that can't be taught easily. And at the same time, I think it is learned very easily by choice and sometimes by circumstance among many first gens, where it's just like, hey, we've had to blend in and we've had to stick out in so many situations, whether it was by choice or circumstance, to the point where we've become so acclimated to it, where it's a part of our lifestyle. Right. And sometimes we're glorified for it. Sometimes we're shamed for it. And that's only because of the fact that people are projecting onto us something that has nothing to do with us. Right. And all we are trying to do is just trying to figure out, like, hey, what's my next step? Because it's not me against you, it's me against myself. Like, I'm trying to be better than myself yesterday. I don't care what you're doing. Right. So it's one of those things where I appreciate the scrappiness because of the fact that I think that's something that it's hard to touch or penetrate. And it contributes to that resiliency among many first-gen students and first-gen individuals.
And I just have to add to what you said, Age, about what is it? People being comfortable and uncomfortable. And when you're with your story, I personally believe that there are times when we need to be uncomfortable, particularly when we're looking at it in terms of growth. I went to a school that less than 1%, my graduate program, less than 1% of the students got Pell Grants. And we just leave that right there. So in my classes, just engaging with me, first gen, Black, grandmother, 50s, it was a lot of identities flying around the room. And what happens is that it makes me think my husband tell me about when they play football, how a lot of people got to know each other who would not have known each other under other circumstances, and they gained respect and understanding. And so sometimes to be uncomfortable is not necessarily, in my opinion, it's my story. Maybe it's my lack of awareness, or someone said to me, I didn't know that people live that way, or it's almost a prick to the conscience. But that doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing. It depends on what we do with it. I know when I've shared things, I'm always making sure I add something to help somebody work it out, because I understand, yeah, it may be kind of difficult to think about somebody 17 living on the streets, trying to take care of a baby. And yeah, I get it, but not being aware of it or knowing it exists will not make it go away. And this person could potentially be somewhere where they can do something to make a difference. So a professor said, we're going to learn to be comfortable with the uncomfortable. I've gotten much better with it. Being uncomfortable is not the same as being unkind. It's not the same as being mean or trying to make folks feel bad for because you were born and you had some things. You don't have to feel bad about that. It's what we do with what we have that matters when it's all said and done.
I'll wrap up with, I was thinking about when you said, Kevin, when you talked about not gatekeeping, and it made me think a lot about just this entire, this discussion that we're all having, everyone putting in the work to write a chapter for this collection. And it made me think, I can't remember who it was, but there was a quote, and maybe it's an older quote, but that idea that when you climb and you get to the top of the ladder, that you turn around and extend your hand to the person below you. And I feel like there's so much of that sentiment among the community of first generation graduates, that there is this feeling and this sentiment that we all know that experience of being confused and feeling like we don't belong, or we're outside of things and things are overwhelming. And someone, something, some place, whatever it was that helped us overcome it and get through it. And that idea that it doesn't necessarily, if it were just a little bit easier, it would make a tremendous difference. And I feel like the people that have come together to share their experiences, that is at the heart of it. So I feel so deeply indebted to everyone that's been a part of this. It's been such a pleasure to meet you and have this conversation today. And I thank you all for doing that, for reaching out your hand to support and help all the other first generation students and the faculty and staff that are working on campuses to serve them. I'm very deeply grateful. So thank you, everyone. And I appreciate it. And I look forward to talking more.
Thank you, Adam. Truly.
Thank you, Adam. It's a great book, great volume.
Yep. Awesome. All right.